Yaakov, heel grabber. Second born, second best in the eyes of my father, who gave me nothing. From him I learned to take, to keep, to hold on. I spent my life fighting for what was mine, wrestling. Not with these, but with this. You have something I want. I would outsmart you. I would win. Ask my brother Esau. Birthright, mine. Ask my father Isaac. Blessing, mine. Ask my uncle Laban. Flocks, daughters, mine. Ask God. In second thought, ask me. I wrestled the Lord God. There, on the Yabok, in the darkness. There, he wounded me, crippled me, broke me. And that is how I won. Because when you fight God, winning does not mean breaking. Winning means being broken. There, it changed my name. I was Yaakov, heel grabber. But I became Israel. God fights. You cannot break God. He will break you. And then, only then, he will fight for you. Then you become the blessing to others that you were trying to steal from others.
Amen, and good morning, my friends. It's good to see you guys today. I love days like this where you come in ready to worship, full of faith, and I could tell that was you today. So it's so good to be in the house of the Lord with you. If you're a guest with us, welcome. Maybe a friend invited you. Maybe you found us on the internet. Maybe you're here for the baptisms. It's good to have you guys with us today. I'm excited about the baptisms towards the end of the service. I know we have some parents with us as well. Welcome. We're so glad that you're here. I'll introduce myself. I'm Daniel Mosley, lead pastor here. It's an honor to be able to serve alongside the families that are here. And maybe you don't know, we have so many different walks of life, people coming from different backgrounds, some pagan, non-religious, all the way, the full gamut of the spectrums. And so when you come into the house today, you may think, well, okay, well, that's different than what I'm accustomed to. At the bottom line, what we want you to know is that we are passionate about Jesus here. We love community, and we love leaning into the Word of God because we believe it's His instruction for our life. And so in just a few moments, we're going to take advantage of this time that we have, and we're going to look at some additional scripture with one another. But I wanted to welcome you. And then secondly, I wanted to kind of share an embarrassing moment with you all. So my wife and I, who was right here, she was singing, we kind of were trading places a little bit today. So she kind of had the word going. You felt that. I felt like, man, we done had church. I don't even need to preach today. We could go home and we would be all right. And then what you may not have realized is I was trading places with her, and I had my mic on, and I'm singing, and I'm up here dancing, and you should not give me a singing mic. Let's just say that, okay? And so if your ears were ringing or they're hurting a little bit, I promise it probably wasn't these guys. You can look at me this morning. So I don't know how I did that, but I did it again. So I'm so glad you guys are here with us. We are in a teaching series. Oftentimes we look at scripture and we'll block it down under an idea. And so we're talking about the story of Jacob. And last week we kicked that off. You picked a great day to be here. Last week was all about an introduction. Today we're really going to start to dive into some meat of this content together. You may or may not know their story, but this was about two twin boys. And at their birth, they had the same conditions. They had the same mama, they had the same daddy, were born at almost the same time, they were raised under the same roof, shared the same home, they had the same conditions. But as we'll continue to see over time, they could not be more polar opposite. And differences in the way that they looked, the way that they dressed, their temperament, their personality. And then we're going to see them today begin to go in opposite directions. And so if you're not familiar with the story, it comes from Genesis and it begins in chapter 25 and it spans 25 chapters. That's a lot of the first book of our Bible. And there's something so significant about Jacob's role in the history of Israel. He had so much influence that 25 chapters are dedicated to his story. And so you'll find his biography there from his birth to his burial. And in this series, we're kind of leaning into him and the relatives around him who had influence. And there's lessons for us to learn from it. There's mistakes that he made. And then my hope is you might be a little bit like me, that as we look into these chapters, it's going to look like a mirror. And you're going to see your own reflection, your own life, your own heart, your decision-making inside of this story. And so Jacob is a man that I can relate to. Hopefully he's a man that you'll find yourself in his story as well. One of the things that we're doing is as we go through this, we're moving really slow, and we're going to take our time through these stories. So even if you've read it before, even if you knew it maybe from Sunday school when you were a kid, I want to encourage you to go back and read alongside us as well. And if you don't like homework, I promise they're going to be small. Last week, I think we only covered about 4 or 5 verses together, if that. This week, it's going to be another handful. Some weeks will be a chapter. Some of them will be a few chapters. What we're going to do is share this outline with you each week on our social media channels. And so many of you are already subscribed to become fans on our Facebook page. If you haven't taken it one step further yet and joined this private, exclusive Pooler fam group, I want you to do that. You can play with your phone at any point, even during service today. Look it up. Find this group, because this is where we do insider information. This is where we're praying for one another, sharing things that are not just public for everyone, but for you who are in the house, for you who call City Church home. And so do that. Take advantage of those resources that we're sharing here in this group. Okay, so last week we kicked it off. We just kind of started to scratch the surface a little bit of the story. So let me quickly catch you up in just a glimpse by rereading their birth account. And so here we are in Genesis chapter 25. And it says that Isaac, and so Isaac is going to be the father of Jacob and his wife Rebekah. Isaac was 40 years old when he married Rebekah. And Isaac prayed to the Lord on behalf of his wife because she was barren. She was childless. They had a dream in their hearts. They wanted to have a kid, and they could not get pregnant. And so they prayed and they prayed and they prayed. And then finally, 20 years later, the Lord answers their prayer. And sure enough, Rebekah becomes pregnant. And when the time came for her to give birth, there were twin boys. What a blessing. They had been waiting and longing, and now the Lord just brings double. And so he blesses them. They're twin boys in her womb. And then the first one to come out was red in color. And his whole body was hairy like a garment. And they named him Esau. And this is not normal, folks. I told you, I have 4 little ones, and they came out bald as could be. And no hair on them. And I don't know about you, but when I read this story, I imagine, just maybe, that Esau coming out looking a little bit like, you know what I told my wife? I said, when I get to heaven one day, Jacob and Esau are going to hunt me down and say, listen, bro, what's up with this? This is what happens in my mind. I don't know what happens to you when you read scripture. I was like, okay, he coming out like baby Chewbacca right here, right? And so scripture goes on, Esau is born, and then after this, his brother comes out and he's grasping at his heel. And that's where we find his name, Jacob. And so Jacob enters into the world, and Jacob immediately, he kind of adopts this like Ricky Bobby mentality, all right? He's like, if you ain't first, you're... That's right. Some of you fellas have seen that one. And so he comes into the world and he's clinging at the heel of his brother, and already he's living up to his name. And so therefore we have the title of last week's sermon was Harry and the Heel Grabber, okay? And so we dove into the story of these two twin boys being brought into the world, and that's where we left it off last week. And we had some fun together. I want to have some fun with you as we look at these stories. And so today, what's going to happen as we dive in, you're actually going to see that it skips forward quite a bit in time. It jumps ahead. And so here's what it says. The boys grew up. Say that with me. Grew up. The boys grew up, and Esau became a skillful hunter, a man of the open country, a man I could relate to, I want to spend some time with. Let's go hunting together. Bow season started right now for your hunters, and you're looking around. Oh, wait, they're not here today. Yes. The boys grew up. Esau becomes a skilled hunter, a man of the open country, and while Jacob was content to stay at home amongst the tent. And so scripture says that they grew up. And when you're reading this, because the story, they were just born, you might assume in your mind like they're just teenage boys at this point. But when you look at this and you begin to study it and look at their story and the timeline, scholars will disagree just a little bit on how old they are, but most of them assume that they're well up in age, a lot of them even landing that they might be about 60 to 70 years old. So these aren't little young lads anymore. They can't blame mama for their mistakes anymore. They're grown men at that point. They've grown up. A lot of life has happened. They've went through a lot of things. They've lost loved ones. When they were 15, they lost their grandfather, Abraham. And so life has happened. Their personalities, their temperament continues to develop and be shaped. And over time, they become less and less like one another, more and more polar opposites, starting to live up to their names. And here's the challenge with these boys. They grew up in age. They grew up physically, but they failed to grow up emotionally. They failed to grow up relationally, and they failed to grow up spiritually. Now, I don't know if you know this or not, but it's actually possible to grow up without growing up. Have you met anyone like that before? If they're sitting next to you, do not elbow them at this time. It's possible for someone to grow up without growing up. That Esau and Isaac, they became men, but they were still acting like boys. And they were fighting like 5-year-olds, and they're supposed to be mature, but they're still immature. And I'm going to give you just a few bonus tips. We're going to get into the meat and to the weight of this in just a moment. Let me just give you a few bonus tips as this thing unpacks today, okay? So beware of grown-ups who have not grown up, right? Distance yourself from those people just a little bit, all right? Those are the ones that immaturity shows up and it plays out in your life. Be careful about that. Now, let me caution you. If you are that individual, it's time to man up. Time to woman up a little bit, okay? Time to grow up. Because if you don't, then what's going to happen is your immaturity and your decision-making and your processing is going to lead to a life that's going to look a lot like Esau's. And we're going to unpack the consequences of that in just a few minutes. But trust me, like none of us want to be in this position. These are men who are acting like boys, growing up without growing up, okay? And so the Bible has a lot to say about that idea. You may remember that Paul comes along in the New Testament. He says, I ought to be able to give you meat at this point in your life, but I've still got you on a bottle. You're still being spoon-fed. The author of Hebrews would say something very similar. You should be grown up. We should be able to teach you in maturity, but we're still having to reteach these basic principles over and over again And this happens in the lives of people around you. You've seen this play out, right? This isn't a spiritual thing. This is like just a growing up thing. And culturally, we find more and more true that people are growing up without growing up. Beware of those kind of people. And if you are one, grow up. All right, so here we go, okay? So the boys grew up, and Esau became a skillful hunter, a man of the open country, while Jacob was content to stay at home amongst their tents. And these boys, they're so polar opposite that if they were today and they were in a pop culture figure, they would be like, Duck Dynasty and like that guy from the Property Brothers, thank you, Home and Garden Network, right? That opposite ends of the spectrum. And because of this, here's something that happens, right? Because of their two different temperaments, because of their two different personalities, their parents begin to play a really dangerous game. Their parents begin to play favorites. Look what it says. It says that Isaac loved Esau because he ate of his game, but Rebekah loved who? Isaac, the father, loves the boy, his son. Why? Because he can go out and kill stuff, because he accumulates the trophies, because they have something in common. He loved to eat of that meat. And so he would go home and he would drag back the game. And can you just imagine that when the boy is coming back home, the delight of his father? And then imagine Jacob's feeling inside of his heart. And we're going to talk about that a little bit next week. These moments lead to huge family dysfunctions that will impact their family for generations to come. And so Isaac loves Esau. And because Jacob was around the house, he was content to stay at home amongst the tents. He would help mama put supper on the table. She loved Jacob. Tip number 2. Parents, don't do this. If you got more than one kid, be cautious about this, right? And it happens so much more subtly than what you might imagine. Now, none of us would say, I have 4 kids. I would never say, well, this one's my favorite or that one's my favorite. And we wouldn't do that. You wouldn't do that. But in such subtleties, it's the little glances, it's the tone of our voice, it's the time that you spend or don't spend. And so while we may not even pick up with it, something happens even in their subconscious as they're growing up that they're picking up on these signs. And now as grown people, they're sitting in the counselor's office with their feet kicked back up on a sofa somewhere. And now they're playing this back and they start, I understand why my behavior went this way. Right? This isn't the meat of it. This is just what's happening inside their story. And parents, grandparents, be careful. Be careful. So Isaac loves Esau, Rebekah loves Jacob, and it's going to lead to this dysfunction over their lives. Now, here's the part of the story, and here's where it's going to start to turn. And this next part that happens, you ever see something or read something or hear a story, and it's so far-fetched, it's so far out there that it's really hard to wrap your mind around, and you're kind of dumbfounded, like, how can anybody think like that? How can anybody make that choice? Well, you're about to see in just a moment, these 2 boys walk through a circumstance, and when I read it, you're probably like me. Could they really be that dumb? Could they really think that way? And so watch what happens as this story unpacks. You're going to see these 2 boys enter into what I would believe is the worst negotiation in human history. Right? I've had some bad negotiations. My wife and I, we saved up our money, and we bought a van. And within like 3 months, the thing was a lemon. It broke down. It was a bad negotiation, but it had nothing on what these boys are about to walk through together. Let's look at the story together, okay? Here we go. Once when Jacob was cooking some stew, Esau came in from the open country, and he was famished. Now, we've already seen that Jacob or Esau is a what? A skillful hunter, right? He's a skillful hunter. He knows how to provide. And he's out in the field. He's out in the open country. And apparently, for whatever reason, this time he's unsuccessful. And so he comes back home, and he's used to dragging game back with him. And now he comes home empty-handed and disappointed and quite a bit emotional. And there's something rumbling within his tummy. And he walks into the room, and he sees Jacob inside the kitchen. And he sees him cooking up Mama's recipe, her favorite, his favorite, and he can smell it wafting through the air even before he gets there. Oh, I know that smell. I know that scent. And his appetite begins to grow within him. And he walks into the house and he says, I am famished. I am famished. And so he's got this feeling of running on empty. He's got this feeling of his stomach growling, and like we would say it, like he's done gone from hungry to what? Hangry. Oh yeah. He's done gone from hungry to hangry. And now his emotions are going to get the best of them. And he walks in the door and he's like, bro, help me out here. I'm dying. I need some food. I'm famished. I'm starving. And he says to Jacob, quick, let me have some of that stew. I'm famished. Look, I'm about to die. Can you get any more dramatic? Come on, Esau. You know people like that too, don't you? Yep. They haven't grown up yet, have they? Right? And so in this moment, he's feeling it. A strong man has a moment of weakness. None of us are exempt from it. And in this moment, he experienced this level of weakness where he's overcome by his desires and he becomes vulnerable. Okay? Let me help you see inside your own story within this, all right? So when you feel weak, be careful what it is that you seek. When you're feeling at your weakest, when you're feeling vulnerable, be careful. Be careful. Caution lights should be going off. You have to become self-aware enough to begin to realize, and this only comes as you grow up, as a level of maturity happens within you, you have to become and be warned that when you are weak, be careful what you seek. And Jacob or Esau becomes convinced that the wrong thing, the thing that he was going to point at to solve the thing within him, it will not satisfy. And he thinks this bowl of stew is going to be the solution. So I have this saying in my own life, and my family knows it pretty well, and it'll be something along the lines of, listen, I need to go to bed right now, because if I don't, anything after this is going to be sin. Right? Pastor's not exempt, right? If I don't get what I need right now, everything after this, I don't even know what I'm capable of doing beyond this. When I get tired, when I get depleted, when my mental energy is gone, when I feel like I don't have anything left to give. You ever feel like that? It's when we're in those moments that we need to be careful. We need to be warned. When you're weak, be careful what you seek. Why? Because what happens? Your perspective is like my perspective. It becomes skewed. Everything becomes emotional, doesn't it? Oh my gosh, I'm going to die. I'm famished, I'm depleted, and my choices as a result of them are impacted when I'm at my weakest. And so Esau's next decision, when he finds himself in this spot, he's usually strong, but now he's in this place where he has something on the inside of him, and he's weakened by it, an uncontrolled desire. And so be careful what you seek. Be careful who you seek. Be careful what you seek when you feel weak and vulnerable. Be equally as careful in who you seek in those moments. You ever read this story and think about, why would Esau go to Jacob? Have you forgotten who this boy is? Have you forgotten what his name means? He's been trying to get one up on you his entire life. From the moment you came out of the womb, he was clinging to your heel, trying to pull you down, looking to take advantage of you. And now Esau, he's coming in this moment of weakness, and he goes to the wrong person. I don't understand what it was about Esau. I imagine him like, baby Chewbacca growing up, right? What was it about Esau that he didn't just walk over and pop the boy in his nose and like take the bowl of soup from him? He could have one-upped him. He could have manhandled him. He could have taken the whole thing. You know why? Because Esau, in his moment of weakness, he forgot the strength that he possessed. And in our moments, when we find ourselves depleted, when we find ourselves famished, when we're running on E and the tank is empty, we forget. We forget the source of our strength, don't we? And we find ourselves doing what Esau did, and we go to the wrong person. And that's exactly what he does in this moment. So, instead of going to someone who wanted something for him, what does Esau do? He goes to the person who wants something from him. And this is something in our minds, and when we're in moments of weakness, that we have to be intentional about processing and who we're going to. Who are those people that we surround ourselves with when our strength is depleted? And Esau, he had a need even beyond his appetite in that moment. Esau had a need that you and I have. Esau has a need that I identify with, and it's that Esau in this moment, Esau needs a friend. Esau needs someone that loves him. Esau needs someone that's going to encourage him. And you, in those moments of weakness, you need the same thing. Now, you hear us talk about this value all the time. If you're new here, we talked about community groups just a moment ago. This is why we preach that message. It's because in moments of weakness, you need to be careful whom you seek and who you surround yourself with. And you need to make a proactive decision, meaning not waiting until I react, but now I'm going to be proactive. I'm going to build a group of people around me that have my best interests, that don't want something from me, but for me. You need a group. You need to do life with other people who are going to encourage you. And if you're a believer in this room, who are going to point you to Jesus when your perspective is skewed, when you can't see the answers that you need. Everybody else in the world becomes a Jacob. They're looking to stand on your shoulders, climb on your back to get ahead in life. Know who those people are. Be careful. Be careful. So he says, Jacob replied, Esau's in the moment of weakness, and he goes to him and he says, give me that stew. And Jacob, and he comes right to him and he says, first, sell me your birthright. I don't want something for you. I need something from you. And this is the thing, and maybe you get this, maybe you understand this, maybe you have a bit of Bible theology and history, but if you don't, let me help you to get the picture. This idea, go back one, this idea of the birthright, right? This is a concept that you need to understand because it applies to you as well. Let me show it to you, okay? And so here we go. Next slide. Benefits of the birthright, right? So in this custom, in this day, in this time, it had some similarities to today, but it had a lot more written in it, that there was actually like this code of conduct, that they could say things orally, there could be something of laying on hands on them, and something would transpire, and it was a legal binding contract that could not be taken back, okay? And so one of the benefits of the birthright that Esau was in line to get, the thing that he was laying on the line, the thing that he was wagering, that he was willing to trade, is he would have double the inheritance. Now, this may not make a lot of sense to you because you may think, well, my parents passed or will pass, and the only thing I'm going to inherit from them is a whole stack of bills. Can't cover the funeral, right? I preach these sermons, I go to these. That's not the case here. Listen, Isaac, Esau's father, he would have been a member of the Billionaires Boys Club. Dude was loaded. He was stacked. He had all the monies. He had all the land. He had all the livestock. And so Esau, by position, by birthright, by being the firstborn, by coming out ahead of Jacob, he's in position to inherit the lion's share of the inheritance. Another thing, benefit of the birthright, is that he would become the head of the family. And so one day he would become the patriarch. When his parents pass away, he would become responsible for his siblings, any of the widows. He would then sit in a position of authority. A third benefit would be a position of spiritual blessing. And so there was just something that happened in the Old Testament that I'm honestly thankful that it's different in the New Testament, is that God would work through the heads of the family. He would speak to the heads, he would work with the heads of the family, and there's a spiritual blessing, a spiritual authority that would come as a benefit of the birthright. And so when Jacob says to me, hey, you want something? I want something. You want to trade? Think about what it is that he has on the line in these moments, right? And so this blessing, this birthright, nobody in their right mind is going to sign up for this, right? Nobody is going to lay that down. Think about, would you go down? My wife, she makes a really good bowl of chicken and dumplings. Like, don't let the skinny frame fool you. I can put away some chicken and dumplings. I love my wife's chicken and dumplings. Ain't no way I'm giving up my birthright for a bowl of chicken and dumplings. What was it in his mind that brought him to this position? How did he get inside this circumstance? He's famished, he's vulnerable, and Jacob has been waiting. Don't kid yourself. Jacob didn't get creative in the moment. Jacob's been plotting, he's been scheming, he's been looking for this moment, he's been anticipating, he's been laying a trap, and finally, when he sees Esau coming in the distance, this is my moment. And he waits, and he pounces when he becomes the most vulnerable. And so Jacob replies, give me your birthright. Esau replies, look, I'm about to die. What good is it going to be to me? And I would reply, and you would reply, and us looking on as an audience would reply, don't do it, bro. It's not worth it. Think about what you're sacrificing. Think about what you're laying down in this moment. Don't go there. Consider the consequences. Esau, he needs a friend like me. He needs a friend like you, doesn't he? But he goes to the wrong person in this moment, and he's willing to lay it all down, and it becomes this. There's no way in his right mind he would have thought about this one inkling of time that transpired over just a few minutes. There's no way he would have seen this and weighed it out and made the decision that he made. He considered it insignificant, didn't he? And something happens in this moment that it'll turn out to be so much more substantial than what he had ever played out and what he had ever thought in his mind. And so Jacob says, swear to me first. And now the hunter has become the hunted. And so Esau swore an oath to him, selling his birthright to Jacob. And it all transpires so fast. And all of the verbiage points at this level that Esau had within his heart that he never considered and slowed down. And so, what did he do? Look how the verbs just compound on one another. They stack up. It says that really without thinking, he ate, and then he did what? And then he drank, and then he did what? And then it doesn't talk about I enjoyed this, it filled my belly. Man, it was worth it. It tasted so good. It was just like I hoped and anticipated. And so what can we draw from Esau? What can we say about Esau in this moment? You can see how impulsive he is. You can see how he lives for the moment. And then you can see how he positions his life to be ruled by his appetites. And he demands, quick, give it to me. I get what I want, when I want, and how I want it. And he demands that he be immediately gratified in this moment. This is why it's hard to believe. What is it that happens to Esau, let's say about 5 or 6 hours after he makes this trade-off? That same appetite comes back, doesn't it? And this is where you and I learn lessons from Esau and Jacob that we can look at in the moment, and we can try to do something. We can try to accept something. We can try to trade off to something. We can try to fill some emptiness, some craving, some desire within us, but we know what happens just a little bit after that. You've experienced enough life to know this is true, and so have I. You always end up empty again, and it always overpromises, and it under-delivers, and it looks good, it smells good, and it might even taste good. It's fun for a season. And then we find ourselves in a place of regret, and disappointment, and pain, and empty and longing all over again. Why? Stew, all it can do is pacify. It will not satisfy. Now, you understand the food is a metaphor, right? You're following with me. Give me the nod. All right, this ain't about your bowl of Lucky Charms or anything like that, okay? All right. All right, let's unpack this a little bit more and talk about what it means, okay? So this story and where Esau it is, and it ends in one of like probably the saddest place in Scripture that you could go and point at. Watch this. Esau, he despised his birthright. And it means that he counted it as nothing. He treated it as insignificant and small, and he treated it with contempt. And you and I, on the other side of history, we look back and we see, and we can probably realize that this birthright was about a lot more than just, position with his family or power or wealth, even land. It was about so much more than that, if you remember the story. It was about a promise, wasn't it? There was a promise that was coming, one to the next generation. You remember the promise that was given to his grandfather, Abraham? Do you remember? Let's read it together. Here's what it says. He says, I will surely bless you and make your descendants as numerous as the stars in the sky and the sands of the seashore. And he says, your descendants will take possession of the cities of their enemies, and through your offspring, all the nations of the earth will be blessed. And so God comes and he makes this promise to Abraham that I'm about to change the whole world as you know it through you and through your bloodline, through your offspring. This is his grandfather. And then God comes and he makes the same promise. He repeats the same kind of thing when he talks to Esau's father, Isaac. And so then it comes to the position of Esau in his birthright, his inheritance. It was supposed to be the promise. It was supposed to be for his children. And when he makes the decision that he makes, because he doesn't have the foresight or the insight in looking forward far enough into his future, he sells it all out. He hangs it all out. His legacy, his children's inheritance was at stake. It should have been. It came out, I am the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Esau. It should have been. And in a moment, it becomes, I'm the God of Abraham, Isaac, and not Esau, but the brother Jacob. The birthright sold away in a moment. Esau despised his birthright. And so you don't need me to preach a lot of this sermon. I'm just reading the story, and you know where it goes, you know how it applies, and what you can feel in your heart, the connection to. If you can't get there, the author of Hebrews helps us to see a little bit of the moral of the story. Let me show you what it says here. He says, "See that no one is sexually immoral or is godless, like Esau, who for a single meal sold his inheritance rights as the oldest son." Now, this is the New International Version. And when you read this in the English Standard Version, it would use the word holy. And when you read this in the King James Version, he would say the word profane. When I look at this, when I'm just reading Genesis 25, it's really hard for me to see why it is that the author of Hebrews would then look back on Esau and use such a strong word such as godless. Now, I would say, yeah, I can see he made some mistakes. This was pretty dumb, wasn't it? But why is it that he would use such a strong word in this moment? Why would the author of Hebrews call him godless? Because of this. Godlessness, it's not just an attitude. Oh, it's an attitude, sorry. Godlessness is an attitude. It's not just an action. And so, listen, you don't have to be an atheist to be considered godless. Godlessness, as it's laid out inside of Scripture, is to treat lightly the things the Lord views as significant. You can come to church on Sunday mornings, and you can sit in the seat where you're at, by the way, and you can still be considered so let's just bring it all right here. Esau and Jacob, they enter into the worst negotiation in human history. Esau gives up so much for so little. And he sells out his birthright for the single bowl of stew. And as spectators, you and I join in together. Don't do it. Don't sell out. See what's in front of you. And I get all the way to the end of the sermon before I give you the title of the sermon. And this is where you and I, that's just now, don't email me, mamas, afterwards. I teach my kids, don't use this word. I spelled it differently. I needed a strong word for us to use. Is my hope, as we're going to look at in just a second, my hope is somehow you hear my voice, you see this on screen the next time you find yourself in the position of Esau, and you're going to start calling it like it is. All right, let's talk about it for just a second. Let's make this real. Let's make this us, okay? So here's the truth. We're all a bit like Esau. You don't want to admit it. I don't want to admit it. And I'd like to think I can negotiate better than that. But man, when I look at the decisions that I've made, in those moments of weakness when I wasn't aware, when I didn't have the foresight and I wasn't looking into my future, I would make momentary decisions that have substantial consequences. You've done the same, haven't you? Right? And so we're all a little bit like Esau. And the reality is, when we're like Esau, we can come to those positions and that's just, oh, don't worry, I'm not going to wash your mouth out with soap afterwards. Come on, help me with it one time, okay? You ready? On 3. 1, 2, 3. That's just stupid. All right, don't you feel liberated? You feel better? All right. All right, take off the religious piece for just a second. Let's get connected here for a second, okay? Did you know, and you may not realize this, and if you're not a Christian, that's okay. I want you to have some insight into something for a second. Even outside of your faith in Jesus, that you have a birthright. Did you realize that? You have a birthright. There are certain promises that are afforded to you, that are over you inside of your life. And there's something substantial at stake. Look at this. God says, I will be a father to you. This is the New Testament. This is 2 Corinthians. I will be a father to you, and you shall be my what? You're going to be my sons. You're my heir. You're the offspring. There's an inheritance for you. You shall be my sons, and you shall be my what? And you shall be my daughters, that there is a birthright for you and I, that there is a blessing, that there are purposes, that there are promises that are for you and I. There is spiritual inheritance. I have a birthright. And you have a birthright. And here's the deal. Here's what I want you to know. Nobody can take that birthright from you. Not your mama, not your daddy, not your family, not your friends. The devil himself cannot take the birthright from you. I want you to see this. Jacob could not take Esau's birthright. He worked behind the scenes, and there were schemes, and there was a plot. And while he could not take it, Esau came to the position and said, I'm just going to give it to you. I'll just give it away to you. And so, like Esau, we trade our birthrights without even thinking, without even contemplating, without even realizing the value of the thing that we're giving away. And in our everyday, every day when I get out of the bed, here's what I'm convinced, okay? I know that when I put my shoes on, put my pants on, not in that order, the other way around. I put my pants on, then I put my shoes on, and then I go outside. Oh, look, a squirrel. I know that when I do that, I know, I see it, I anticipate it, and you should too. There are going to be things that are going to present themselves as bowl of stew. And guess what's behind it? Something that wants your birthright. And you need to see it and not be reactive, be proactive, have things in place, and you've already set within your heart how you're going to respond and what you're going to do. Oh, no. I understand who I am. I know who my Father is. Oh, no. I have an inheritance. I have a birthright. I'm a son of the King. You're a daughter of the King. And there's a birthright at stake. There's a blessing at stake. And every day, I'm going to be tempted to trade it away, and you're going to be tempted to trade it away. You're going to be led by your senses, and you're going to be controlled by this appetite that grows within you. And if you got nothing else, this is what I want you to know. This is it right here. Never trade what you want most for what you want in the moment. And I don't have to convince you. You've got it written in you. It's tattooed on your heart. It's a part of your DNA, that thing that you long for and you desire and you see yourself walking into. And yet there's these subtleties. There's these places of compromise. And in the moment, because I don't have the foresight, or maybe I'm weak, or maybe I find myself vulnerable, I make Stew-pid trades. And I give up the thing that means the most to me in the world for some temporary fix. And so somewhere in our story, we all become like Esau, don't we? And for me, I was a temper person. Rage. Say things I didn't want to say, wishing for takebacks. And what I realized what was happening is that because of my identity and because of my testimony and who I'm supposed to be, that every time that I let that emotion get the best of me and get control of me, do you know what I was doing in the moment? I was trading a bowl of stew for a birthright. And come on and help me with this. That's just stupid. And then sometimes, I'm going to be careful with how I describe this. I don't have a great filter sometimes, so if you have kids middle school or under, I do encourage you to use kids ministry, but I'm going to be cautious, okay? Sometimes we trade our birthright for these moments of gratification. Sometimes somewhere we get this emotional craving and longing inside of us. Sometimes we feel so alone and so empty, and we've convinced ourselves that nobody's going to love me. And then we bring ourselves to the position, nobody's going to marry me or marry me again. In this place within us, I have rights and I have needs. And what happens is because we can't see what's on the other side of just a few passing, fleeting moments. We trade our birthright for some gratification. We trade our birthrights for some fantasy inside of our mind that plays out in just minutes. We trade our birthright for a bowl of stew, and that's just stupid. Sometimes we trade the birthright for a sensation. I need to take the edge off. I need to chill. My anxiety's up. And so what do? We go to a pill. We go to a bottle. We go to some substance. And we found the way to disguise it and hide it. We return to an old habit. And we've conditioned ourselves that this is okay. The Lord understands. And what I want you to know is that's just stupid. When we talk about birthright, now, it was easy to see Esau and to see that it wasn't just about the power, it wasn't about the position, it wasn't just about the property, right? It was also about that promise. And the promises are there for you and I as well. And there are countless examples, and there are too many for me to share. But in the idea of this birthright, let me just share a couple of them with you, okay? So sometimes we are trading our birthright for something that Jesus himself promised to us. Look at this right here. He says that when I go, I'm going to leave an inheritance to you. So he's talking now. I'm leaving this earth. And he says, when I go, I'm going to leave an inheritance. I'm going to give you peace that passes all understanding. I'm going to give you a peace that's bigger than your problem. Do you know what we do? Some of you ate it for breakfast this morning. We trade our peace for a bowl of worry. Some of you ate it for dinner last night and you laid your head down on your pillow and you were overwhelmed and you were consumed and anxiety began to wrestle out and you played off all the what ifs inside of your mind. And in those moments, what you are doing is you are trading an inheritance, a promise from God who is your Father. And in that moment, you're trading peace for worry and anxiety. And guess what, my friends? That's just stupid. It's just stupid. And sometimes we trade our joy for a bowl of stew. The devil can't take your joy. Circumstances can't take your joy. But we position ourselves and we give access and we grant it and we give it away. Joy isn't contingent on what you're going through, what you're emotionally feeling in the moment. And we trade our birthright, a promise, for a bowl of stew. And you know how it goes. That's just stupid. It's just stupid. So let me just for a minute as we close and bring this together. Let me be the friend for you that Esau needed. Let me kind of do the pastor thing for just a second. Is that okay? All right. You have an inheritance. And a bowl of stew is always, always, always going to leave you unsatisfied. And you will always be hungry again. It's just a matter of time. And if we sell out, pain, regret, worry, anxiety, fear, these are the things that we're trading in its place. And so again, never trade what you want most for what you want in the moment. And you're going to be tempted, just like I'm tempted, to trade it out, to sell out. And you're just going to come up short, and you're going to look at an empty bowl. Did I sell out for this? And you know what it is in your heart. You know what it is in your life. You know that thing for you. And it sure ain't a bowl of beans, is it? But it's something. And we all have that something that every one of us, we're a bit like Esau. And so I'm just going to ask you your permission. Could I ask you a couple of questions as we close it all out? Let me start with this one. What are you tempted to trade for your birthright? What is it, that thing that when we're talking about here, what is it that you've settled for? What is that thing? And then the second question is this, have you despised your birthright? Have you despised your birthright? There was another story inside of the New Testament, and it's about another two sons. It's one of the most famous parables that Jesus would teach, and I think it relates to this, and I think it will help you because it helps me, and it's going to help us get there, okay? There was another son, and he despised his birthright as well. He had an inheritance that was coming to him, and his father was wealthy. And he goes to his father, and he doesn't want to wait. And he says, I want my inheritance, and I want it right now. Quick, give it to me. And he takes off. Father blesses him, and he gives it to him, and he goes out, and he eats bowl of stew after bowl of stew after bowl of stew. And he's living it up. He's living large. And finally he comes to this position where he looks down at his bowl and he realizes just how empty it all is. And then he remembers back to his house. And he thinks about the servants of that house. And he thinks about the brother of that house. And he thinks about the way in which they're fed. And I'm rolling around with the pigs, and I'm playing in the mud, and my stew's gone. And he decides in his mind, I have a good explanation. I'm going to come up with this, and I'm going to present my story, and I'm going to plead my case. And you know how this goes. And when he returns back home, it says that the father of this boy, this prodigal, it says that he sees him off in the distance, and he gets his nerves up, and he's ready to position himself and to present his argument. And the father sees him and bypasses all of that stuff, and he takes off running. And what does he do? He embraces the boy, and he loves on him, and no talk of what you gave up or what you left behind or why you made the decision. He kills the fatted calf. He gives him the ring of authority back in his life, and he sets him up as if it had never happened, and he gives him his birthright back. And I love that story, and I read that story, and you've heard it, and it speaks to me, but there's also a tension that exists within it. There's two characters, two sons, and they made the same exact mistake. They despised their birthright. You have Esau. He hung it all out for a bowl of stew. And you have the prodigal who despised his birthright and just squandered it all away. When we see Esau, he feels guilty just like the prodigal did. He wishes for a take back. He wishes for a do-over. He wishes he could do some things differently in his life. But this is what it says about him. This is the other part of what we started earlier. In Hebrews, he says, afterwards, as you know, when Esau wanted to inherit the blessing, he was rejected. He had rejected his birthright, and now he's remorseful. He wants it to be different, and he tries to come back, pushed away, and he's rejected, and there's no place for you here. You should have thought about it in the moment. And this is the expectation that I have of my relationship with God. I expect him when I sell it all out and I make my mistakes and I try to bring myself to a position, I expect him to respond in this way. There's no going back. You've gone too far. You sold out, and you should have thought about it ahead of time. And it says that even though he saw the blessing and he's crying and he's pleading and he's repentive, it says that it could not change. And there's a tension between Esau and the prodigal. What is it that separates the two of them? Both have despised their birthright. What's the difference? There was another son, the firstborn. When I think about this story, we can give away our birthright. We can trade it away in a moment. And every one of us have done it. Every one of us have traded away the birthright. The Bible would call that sin. And he would say, all of you, you've sinned, you've sold out, and you've fallen short. And every one of us find ourselves in the position of Esau. We deserve what we get. We deserve the rejection. And yet because of the New Testament story, because of another son, because of Jesus, because of the firstborn and the only born Son of God, he stands and he pays the price and says, you know what? Yeah, you did. Yeah, you deserve it. And somehow he moves into this position where he bought it back, all of your birthright. All of the promise that you've sold off, he redeems it. And he says, your opportunity is that you come to me like the boy, like the prodigal, who finally sees the bowl for what it is, and he runs home, and the father waits. And he waits. And every one of us, we've sold it off. Every one of us have come up short. None of us are exempt. And I lived a lot of my life running just that way. Mother of one of my friends is in the room today, knew me when I ran that way. At some point, this ain't what I hoped it was going to be. Let me pray for you. Father, I want to pray for a couple of people, different groups of people in the room. Lord, I want to pray first for those of us who would say, I'm a Christian, I'm a believer. And at some point we've made the decision, we've accepted you, and yet I don't think that we see it fully the way that you have this inheritance of this birthright for us. Father, would you forgive us that even as believers, as Christ followers, when we still sell out, we still sell short, when we make decisions that are going to compromise, decisions that we know would disappoint your heart. God, I know that you're looking on our life like we would be to that friend, and don't do it. There's a better way. I have more purpose for you. Father, forgive us when we're in that position. If that's you here in this room, this is a moment. If you felt the Lord speaking to you or touching your heart or talking about an area, this is a moment here where you get to say, God, forgive me for that. Now, would you restore to me what is lost? Now, Father, people are here for different reasons today. Some came with a friend, found us on the internet, looking for something, searching for something. Maybe they're here for the baptism. Father, if there's one in the room today who's ran off and they feel so far from you that they feel rejected and that there's no path back home, would you speak to them now in this moment? God, would you remind them of who you are as a gracious Father who calls them home? God, would you show them the picture now of you running towards them, just waiting for them to take that first step, a stride towards you, to trust you again, to believe.